What's going on, everybody? They say the most dangerous outlaw motorcycle clubs aren't the ones flashing their colours in front of cameras or roaring through cities in loud, headline-chasing parades, but the ones that operate in the dark, the ones whose names most people never hear until it's already too late. And if you've ever taken the time to study the outlaw world long enough to recognize patterns, you eventually learn that fear doesn't come from volume, it comes from silence. And no club has ever mastered that quiet menace more completely than the Sons of Silence, a brotherhood forged not through the desire to be famous, but through the determination to be untouchable, unseen, and unforgettable in all the ways that matter. Founded in 1968 in a Colorado garage, 4 men with beer in their hands and rebellion in their blood sketched out a patch inspired by the Budweiser logo and unknowingly set the foundation for a criminal empire that would stretch across states, decades, and generations, growing from a local crew of misfits into one of the most quietly feared organizations in American outlaw history. While other clubs chased notoriety, posing for cameras, picking fights on highways, starring in documentaries, bragging about their wars, the Sons of Silence built power differently, expanding the way a storm front rolls across the plains, slow, heavy, and absolutely unstoppable, spreading into Colorado, Iowa, Kansas, Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, the Dakotas, and beyond, until their influence blanketed the Midwest like a shadow nobody could escape. In Colorado Springs, a city defined by military discipline and pristine streets, the Sons embedded themselves like a second, darker heartbeat beneath the surface. Bar owners stiffened when they heard engines approaching. Locals stepped aside without making eye contact, and cops learned quickly that approaching a Son meant watching every hand, every shift in posture, because these men communicated with looks, not words, and one wrong move could turn a conversation into a war. Their members weren't caricatures of outlaw culture either. Sure, some fit the stereotype, leather vests, long hair, ink crawling up their necks. But others looked like your neighbor, your co-worker, your kid's football coach. Clean-cut men who blended perfectly into daylight, only revealing their true identities when the clubhouse door shut and daylight vanished behind steel and smoke. Violence for them wasn't sloppy or impulsive. It was calculated, ritualized, and executed with the precision of a military unit, used only when necessary to enforce respect, territory, loyalty, or fear, because fear, done correctly, lasts far longer than bloodshed. They armed themselves with guns, knives, brass knuckles, and padlocks wrapped in bandanas, weapons chosen for silence, not spectacle, because the Sons understood better than anyone that the loudest attacks attract the most heat. But the quiet ones carve the deepest scars. Their reputation with law enforcement in the 70s, 80s, and 90s grew not from what they said, but from what they left behind. Broken rivals, terrified witnesses, drug and weapons pipelines threading through the Midwest like dark arteries, and a code of conduct so unforgiving that betrayal wasn't an act a man survived twice. Their most infamous rivalry with the Outlaws MC exploded in 1980, after a confrontation involving armed Sons entering an Outlaws clubhouse, a spark that detonated into a multi-state feud of shootings, stabbings, ambushes, and revenge killings, culminating in the death of the Outlaws' national vice president inside his own building, a murder that escalated tensions into a cold war that simmered for years, spilling blood in alleys, parking lots, and highways, most of it never making the news, because when violence is handled by men who understand silence, it often leaves no witnesses. By the 1990s, the Sons weren't just a club, they were a system, a machine built on discipline, secrecy, and unwavering loyalty, with strict ranks, enforcers who handled punishment, nomads who drifted between chapters managing the dirtiest work, and a prospecting process engineered to break a man down until he either hardened into steel or shattered completely. Prospects were tested with brutal tasks, sleepless nights, unrelenting pressure, and situations designed to see who would fold, who would talk, who would hesitate when hesitation wasn't allowed, because the Sons believed that a patch wasn't just earned, it was paid for in pain, sweat, scars, and silence. Tattoos symbolized devotion, badges of honor burned into skin, but they were also considered club property, meaning if a man betrayed the Brotherhood, those tattoos could be removed by force with blades, heat, or whatever tool the enforcers deemed appropriate for the message they wanted to send. The club operated like a quiet government, establishing rules, rituals, and methods of communication so subtle that outsiders rarely understood how deep their structure ran, and even insiders sometimes failed to see how closely they were being watched until judgment fell on them like a hammer. Yet even the strongest walls can crack from within. And for the Sons, that fracture came in the form of an undercover ATF agent named Blake Butler. A man who infiltrated their ranks so deeply he nearly earned the patch, living alongside them for years, sharing their rides, their beers, their secrets, and their sins, all while recording weapons deals, drug distribution, and internal hierarchy as meticulously as a surgeon mapping organs before an operation. Every day he woke up with the knowledge that one slip, a wrong detail, a misplaced question, a single moment of hesitation would end with him buried in a field or cut into pieces nobody would ever find because the Sons didn't tolerate snitches, rats, or federal ghosts. But he held steady, gathering enough evidence for the ATF to launch Operation Silence Thunder in 1999, a multi-state raid that tore through clubhouses, arresting dozens of members, seizing guns, bombs, meth, cash, and publicly declaring that the Sons of Silence had been crushed, dismantled, eliminated. But outsiders always misunderstand silence. What looks like defeat is often just a retreat into the shadows, and what seems like collapse is usually the quiet before a new storm. After the raids, leadership shifted, chapters reorganized, pressure from the feds cooled, and the Sons rebuilt underground, cutting noise, cutting exposure, and doubling down on the same philosophy that had kept them alive since 1968. Speak less, move smarter, hit quieter, survive longer. They expanded into the Dakotas, revived struggling chapters, absorbed independent riders, strengthened alliances with certain clubs, and declared quiet, strategic distance from others, all while avoiding the spotlight that had burned so many outlaw organizations to ashes. When longtime National President J.R. Reed died, his funeral turned into a thunderous procession of Sons of Silence members from across the country, bikes stretching for miles, engines rumbling like a storm system rolling across the plains, proving to rivals, police, and the public that the club was far from dead. It was alive, organized, and united in a way that only time-tested Brotherhood can produce. Today, the Sons of Silence exist in the outlaw world exactly as they intend to exist. Not loud, not ostentatious, not bragging, but present, powerful, respected, and feared in equal measure. They've refined their operations, grown more selective with recruitment, strengthened their internal discipline, and embraced a strategy built entirely around invisibility, understanding that in a world obsessed with cameras, attention, and constant noise, the greatest weapon any outlaw organization can possess is the ability to move without being seen, to act without being heard, and to influence without leaving fingerprints. They've perfected psychological warfare, controlling spaces without saying a word, making rivals think twice before crossing state lines, silencing witnesses with presence alone, and reminding law enforcement that every interaction with a Son carries the potential for explosive violence even when nothing appears to be happening. Their power comes not from chaos but from calculation, not from headlines but from whispers, not from the roar of engines but from the silent, chilling understanding that storms don't have to make noise to destroy everything in their path. They move like ghosts across the Midwest, embedding themselves in neighborhoods, maintaining legitimate businesses as fronts, using veterans, mechanics, truckers, and seemingly ordinary men to create a network that blends perfectly into the fabric of everyday America. They know when to strike, when to vanish, when to negotiate, and when to unleash fury so precise it leaves no trail. After more than half a century, the Sons of Silence have become a blueprint for how an outlaw motorcycle club survives not 5 years, not 10 years, but generations, through patience, discipline, fear, loyalty, and above all, silence. Because in the end, the most dangerous storms aren't the ones that roar across the sky announcing themselves to the world. They're the ones that gather unnoticed, building strength in the dark, waiting for the exact moment to break, and when they do, the world only understands what happened once everything is already destroyed. And that is exactly why the Sons of Silence aren't just a motorcycle club. They are a force, a presence, a living storm of steel, leather, loyalty, vengeance, and shadow, thriving not in the spotlight, but in the quiet places where power is real, consequences are absolute, and silence speaks louder than anything else on Earth. And as the decades roll deeper into the 2000s and 2010s, the Sons of Silence didn't fade into history the way federal agencies predicted. They evolved, sharpening their methods, tightening their structure, and learning from the mistakes that destroyed louder clubs who couldn't resist the temptation of cameras, fame, or ego. While rival organizations were busy appearing on reality shows, bragging online, or starting public wars, the Sons doubled down on invisibility, becoming the kind of outlaw brotherhood that existed beneath the country's awareness like pressure beneath the Earth's crust, building quietly, steadily, dangerously. Members learned to live dual lives: outlaws in the clubhouse, citizens in the daylight, running garages, towing companies, tattoo shops, trucking outfits, leather stores, gun ranges, and a dozen other legitimate fronts that masked deeper operations. Their criminal networks became colder, more efficient, less chaotic, relying on trusted veterans rather than unpredictable recruits, understanding that loyalty meant nothing if it wasn't backed by intelligence, discipline, and the ability to keep one's mouth welded shut. As police departments shifted focus to gangs who made noise, posting on social media or parading colors through cities, the Sons slipped further into the background, becoming a ghost network of riders who communicated through hand signals, coded gestures, and decades-old methods that didn't rely on phones or technology, because they understood better than anyone that the digital age was a trap built to expose the reckless. Their clubhouses became fortresses of silence: steel doors, cameras, guarded perimeters. Not so much to keep intruders out, but to prevent the wrong tongues from slipping once the beer started flowing. Because inside those walls, truth was currency and loose talk was treason. Older members drilled younger ones in the rules of survival, teaching them to watch exits, memorize faces, note vehicles, and treat every stranger as a potential informant. They trained them to ride in formation tight enough to control the road, but loose enough to adapt to ambushes, to shake tails, to lose surveillance, to melt into traffic and reappear states away. They trained them to organize meetings in parking lots where phones were left in cars, batteries removed, pockets emptied, engines running, and nobody spoke above a murmur. They trained them to understand that conflict didn't begin with fists or blades. It began with presence, posture, eye contact, the quiet measurements exchanged in the first 3 seconds between two men sizing each other up. And as the club grew older, something surprising happened. The Sons of Silence became not only more feared, but more strategic, developing alliances with clubs they once rivaled, brokering peace where it benefited them, and cutting ties the moment a group became too reckless, choosing long-term stability over short-term violence. They learned the chessboard of the modern outlaw landscape, where every state line, every bar, every event, every bike night was a potential battlefield if mishandled. And the Sons' approach, methodical, cold, controlled, gave them an edge that louder clubs couldn't compete with. In the 2000s, federal agencies began to notice a pattern. While other clubs were crumbling under raids, infighting, betrayals, and media attention, the Sons remained steady, their numbers consistent, their chapters quietly active, their influence intact. Investigators described them as well-structured, tactically disciplined, and extremely selective, qualities you don't often hear associated with outlaw motorcycle clubs, but the Sons weren't trying to be typical, they were trying to endure. Younger prospects entering the club found themselves stepping into a world that felt less like a biker gang and more like a covert fraternity where every action had weight, every order had purpose, and every mistake had a consequence. They learned the history not from documentaries, but from the mouths of men who lived through shootouts, raids, betrayals, revenge killings, and long stretches of prison time. They learned the significance of every patch, every color, every rule, understanding that nothing on their vest was decorative, everything was earned, everything was enforced. And in this modern era, the Sons grew even more cautious of outsiders, informants, and untested recruits, favoring older men with established careers, families, and reputations to lose. Men who didn't want attention, men who didn't need chaos, men who would defend their brothers not out of reckless pride, but out of cold loyalty. They also advanced their financial operations, moving away from chaotic street-level activity toward more organized, harder-to-trace ventures, money laundering, trucking routes, supply chains, security contracts, and networks that used legitimate businesses as both shields and weapons. Their drug operations became more science than savagery, handled by men who understood quantity, risk, and logistics, not amateurs looking to make a quick buck. Their weapons distribution moved through channels designed to minimize exposure, passing from trusted hands to trusted hands like pieces of a puzzle only insiders could see. Chapters in the Dakotas, Kansas, Indiana, and the Midwest grew more self-sustaining, operating with autonomy but always under the umbrella of national leadership, a quiet central command that rarely showed its face but always made its presence felt. And as the world changed, social media rising, surveillance expanding, drones filling the skies, police tech evolving, the Sons adapted, studying law enforcement tactics, analyzing patterns, educating members on digital security, teaching them to communicate through analog methods that left no trail. They became experts at disappearing, at blending, at existing in two worlds without leaving footprints in either. Stories spread in the outlaw community of Sons of Silence riders appearing out of nowhere in small towns, handling business, and vanishing before dawn. Stories of rivals who tested the club and regretted it without ever understanding how the retaliation was organized. Stories of quiet men who walked into rooms and shifted the entire atmosphere without saying a word. And through it all, the club's identity remained rooted in the same principle that birthed it. Silence is strength. Younger riders embraced it, older riders enforced it, and the world around them, louder, faster, more chaotic, only proved it further. Today, if you ride through the Midwest long enough, you might see their patch, a skull in a winged helmet, the word silence arched across the top, but you won't see them causing trouble, shouting, fighting, or broadcasting their existence the way other clubs do. Their power isn't in theatrics, it's in presence. Their reputation isn't built on news reports. It's built on stories whispered by men who survived crossing them. Their fear doesn't come from noise. It comes from absence, because the Sons of Silence are always around, even when you can't see them, always watching, always calculating, always ready to move, reminding the outlaw world that storms don't need thunder to destroy everything in their path. And that is why the Sons of Silence endure, not as relics of the past, but as architects of the future of Outlaw Brotherhood, a future built not on fame or fury, but on discipline, precision, calculation, and the unbreakable truth that silence isn't weakness, it's dominance perfected.